My father smirked, saying, "Only legitimate grandchildren get cake." My daughter lowered her plate without a word. My husband looked at our child, then at my parents, and with no warning tapped his glass, stood up, and said something that left everyone pale. "Only real grandkids get cake," my dad, Frank, said with that smug little grin he always wore. And my daughter Lily slowly lowered her plate while my husband, Mark, glanced from my parents to our child and then, without any warning at all, tapped his glass, stood up, and said something that drained the color from every face at the table. We were barely 15 minutes into what was supposed to be a harmless family dinner when it happened, right after the roast was set down and someone made an offhand joke about the gravy being too thick. That kind of background chatter where nobody's actually listening but everyone nods along just to keep the peace, that fake kind of peace I'd lived with my whole life. Lily was sitting beside me, swinging her legs with one shoe half slipped off, and she'd been excited all evening about dessert because she spotted the cake box as soon as we arrived and leaned over to whisper chocolate to me like it was some big secret. So when my cousin Jenna brought the cake out and started cutting it, Lily leaned forward with both hands the way 4-year-olds do, totally unaware that grown adults were about to wreck the moment. Jenna gave her a small slice, carefully set it on her plate like it was something precious, and smiled, and that's when my dad, casually sipping his wine with that same self-satisfied smirk I grew up resenting but learned to tolerate, said it loud enough for everyone to hear. "Only legitimate grandkids get a slice of the cake." At first the room didn't fully stop, there were a few nervous laughs and someone cleared their throat, but it took only a second for the words to sink in, and when they did they landed hard, right in front of a little girl holding a fork and trying to understand why everyone suddenly looked uncomfortable. I looked at my mom, Carol, and she didn't even blink. Like this was something she'd heard before and agreed with like it was common sense. My brother Paul suddenly became very interested in his phone, Jenna stared down at the table, and Mark just kept staring at my parents until he stood up, not slow or dramatic, just done. He tapped his glass once with his fork, the clink way louder than it should have been, and said, "If you don't consider Lily your granddaughter, then you're no longer part of this family's business, and if you're wondering whether that includes the money you've been getting every week, yeah, that stops tonight." I froze, barely breathing, while my mom looked up like she was about to argue, but Mark cut her off before she could get a word out, telling them he wasn't going to stand there and let a child be humiliated, that they'd been pretending long enough, that they clearly didn't love Lily, and because of that they no longer got to benefit from us. Then he sat back down, poured himself a glass of water, calm as could be, and for the first time I could remember, my father had absolutely nothing to say. I wish I could say it felt empowering or freeing, but mostly it felt like something finally snapped, something I'd been holding together with excuses and duct tape for years. I defended my parents, made excuses for them, told Mark they'd eventually come around, but they never did and they never were going to, because they never truly saw Lily as my child, and honestly they barely saw her at all. And for what? Biology. I didn't marry Mark for some fantasy, I married him because I loved him and because I loved Lily, and it really was that simple until my parents decided to make it complicated. What they didn't know was that the $700 they'd been getting every week didn't come from some random account, it came from me, or more accurately from Mark through me, and he never complained or questioned it, just told me to do what I needed to do when I said they were struggling. They never thanked him, never even acknowledged it, they just expected it like it was owed to them, but now it wasn't. After dinner I buckled Lily into the back seat, and she was sleepy and confused, not really understanding what had happened, and I kissed her forehead and told her I was proud of her. When we got home I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in silence, knowing my phone was going to start buzzing with angry messages, accusations, and calls saying I was ungrateful, that I'd betrayed them, that I was letting my husband control me, even though the truth was they'd never respected me as a mother, a wife, or even a person, and now they were about to learn what it meant to lose the one person who kept saving them. The messages started before we even reached the driveway, first from my mom saying, "So now your husband makes decisions for you and embarrasses us in front of everyone," followed by another a few minutes later asking if I really thought cutting off my parents made me some kind of hero, and then my dad jumped in saying I owed them more than I realized, ending with the not-so-subtle threat that we'd be talking soon, just me and them, without Mark influencing me. I stared at my phone, set it face down on the counter, and didn't touch it again that night. Lily was asleep within 10 minutes of getting home, unaware of the details but still sensing something was wrong, and Mark didn't say a word as he tucked her in. When he came back downstairs he poured us both a drink and sat next to me, and we didn't need to talk because the decision had already been made. What my parents also didn't know was that I'd already canceled the automatic payment before dessert was finished. My hands shaking under the table as I logged in on my phone, stopped the transfer, and stared at the confirmation screen, even though it didn't change how broken I felt. I hoped they might cool down after a few days or realize they'd crossed a line and apologize, or at least pretend to, but by Monday they switched strategies and the emails started flooding in, with my mom trying a softer tone at first, sending one titled, "Let's not throw away family," then another reminding me they were still my parents, and finally the line that shattered whatever was left in me, telling me I wasn't Lily's real mother and shouldn't pretend I was. That was the moment something inside me fully cracked, and my dad followed it up with a long message full of words like betrayal, bloodline, and responsibility, as if love had ever mattered less to them than DNA. He wrapped it up with what was basically a threat, even though he tried to make it sound polite, saying things could get difficult if I didn't straighten this out, and that was when I finally blocked their numbers and deleted every email, after forwarding all of it to Mark so he could see exactly who we were dealing with. 2 days later I got a message from the front desk at Mark's office telling me my father Frank had shown up asking to speak with my husband about urgent family business, and security had to walk him out because he wouldn't leave. Apparently he didn't shout or get physical, he just caused a scene by acting like he belonged there, telling the receptionist he was family, and when she asked what the meeting was about he said, "He'll know it's about the money." Mark texted me only one sentence after that, saying Frank wouldn't be coming anywhere near his building again because security had already been notified. That night I sat alone in the backyard thinking about the version of myself who would have apologized, the woman who would have called them and begged them to accept Lily even a little, but that version of me didn't exist anymore. What they did wasn't just rude or careless, it was cruel, because they publicly humiliated a 4-year-old, not in private, not behind closed doors, but right there with cake on the table and 20 people watching, because they wanted a public win and instead they earned a public fallout. The worst part was that they truly believed they could still control me, that if they made enough noise I'd cave, terrified of breaking the illusion of family, but that illusion had already shattered. Then my cousin Josh called, sounding uncomfortable and torn, like he didn't want to be involved but felt he had to tell me, and he said my mom Carol had been telling people that Mark forced me to block them, that he was controlling me, cutting off money to isolate me, and that she'd even told Aunt Marie he was abusive. I stayed quiet, let Josh finish, thanked him and hung up. And while the change hadn't happened all at once, that moment sealed it, because this was no longer about money or respect, it was a fight they started. Just like always, it began quietly and manipulatively, first with a voicemail from my mom using that soft fake sweet voice saying we all said things we didn't mean and it was time to move past it and get back to normal, followed by an email titled Rebuilding Trust. That was 2 paragraphs of half apologies mostly blaming Mark for turning me against them. She said they were willing to let go of the drama if I admitted the dinner got out of hand and reminded me of everything they'd supposedly done for me, saying I'd changed since getting married, and she was right, I had changed, I'd grown a spine, and that's what they couldn't handle. After 2 weeks of silence from me, the tone turned sharp and hostile, and my dad sent a long message claiming cutting them off financially was reckless, that I owed them morally for raising me, and that they were now at risk of losing their home because of my emotional outburst, even writing, "You were nobody before us, remember that," and near the end slipping in a line that made my stomach drop, "Don't force us to come for what we're owed." It was vague on purpose, and that's how they always operated, never clear enough to pin down, just enough to scare you, so I forwarded it to Mark, and for the first time since the dinner I didn't see anger in his face, I saw focus, calm and sharp, as he said we needed to make sure they couldn't touch anything. Over the next 48 hours we moved fast, had our financial advisor comb through every account, closed or transferred anything I'd ever co-signed, removed my name from utilities I'd helped them get when their credit was wrecked, canceled the shared grocery card, locked them out of our streaming services, and then I called a lawyer, not to start a legal battle but to create a paper trail just in case. 3 days later the doorbell rang and a woman with a badge and clipboard stood there saying she was with Child Protective Services, explaining that an anonymous report claimed Lily was living in an unstable home, that her biological mother had passed, that I wasn't fit to raise her, and that her father might be manipulative and financially abusive, using the exact words I'd read in my parents' emails. I let her inside because there was nothing to hide, and she walked through our kitchen, glanced into the living room where Lily sat coloring and humming, smiled at the woman, held up a blue giraffe drawing and said, "This is for Mommy," which made the worker look at me, nod, write something down, ask a few routine questions and leave quietly apologizing and saying this kind of thing happens when people feel they've lost control. She didn't have to say it out loud, I already knew my parents had made the call. And in that moment I realized they'd weaponized a government agency against a child, crossing a line I never thought they'd touch. That night I sat on the floor of Lily's room watching her sleep with her stuffed giraffe tucked under her chin, knowing exactly what had to happen next. And it went beyond blocking numbers, because I deleted every photo, message, and reminder of them, scrubbed them out of my life completely, while Mark changed the security codes, installed cameras, and I updated the daycare with strict instructions that my parents were not allowed anywhere near her. Then I called the lawyer again and told them I wanted a cease and desist, because if my parents tried anything else I wanted it documented. I don't want them anywhere near my daughter ever, I said. And Mark didn't hesitate for a second before nodding and telling me they were going to lose their minds, to which I told him that was exactly what I was counting on. They didn't want back into our lives because they cared or because they suddenly found love for Lily or me. They wanted access, control, money, and power, and this time I let them sit in the silence they created and gave them exactly what they earned, which was nothing at all. 2 full weeks went by with no emails, no voicemails, no surprise CPS visits, and the quiet almost felt suspicious, like that moment in a movie right before everything blows up. But Mark and I finally started breathing again. We took Lily to a fall festival in town where she wore a tiny hoodie with ears sewn onto the hood and proudly picked out a pumpkin nearly as big as she was, and we laughed, took pictures, and tried to remember what life felt like before all the chaos. That night when I tucked her in, she asked why we hadn't gone to Grandma and Grandpa's house lately, and I told her gently that sometimes grown-ups forget how to be kind, and when that happens it's better to give them some space, and she nodded, whispered, "Okay, Mommy," and fell asleep clutching her giraffe. The next day my brother Paul called, and I hadn't spoken to him in over a month because he always avoided family conflict, never picked sides, never stirred the pot, so I wasn't prepared for him to open with, "I think Mom and Dad are planning something." He didn't sound angry or dramatic, just scared. And he told me they were telling people they planned to fix things before the holidays, and were making financial moves to reassert their rights over the family business. He said he overheard Frank on the phone with a lawyer talking about probate leverage and biological legitimacy, and when I asked what that meant he admitted he didn't really know, but then added that Dad had told Uncle Ray he might have a way to undo what happened at the dinner, saying I was just the face of the business and Mark was the one with the real control, and that if he pushed hard enough he could still get back in. I thanked Paul, promised not to tell them he called, and after hanging up I sat there for a long time, not scared or angry but stunned, realizing they weren't backing off, they were escalating. That night Mark and I pulled out the box from the back of our closet, a fireproof locked container holding shareholder agreements, power of attorney documents, and the finalized adoption papers we'd quietly filed a month after we got married. Something we never made a big deal about because Lily's original birth certificate still listed her biological mother out of respect, but legally, on every line that mattered, I was her mother and no one could undo that, not even my parents. The next day our lawyer sent the cease and desist by courier, and Frank signed for it himself, and 2 hours later my phone buzzed with a security alert showing movement at our front gate. When I pulled up the camera feed, I saw my father standing there holding an envelope, not ringing the bell or saying a word, just setting it down on the gate post and walking away. Inside was a typed letter that was formal, calculated, and vile, claiming Lily wasn't my real child, that she had no legal connection to the family name, that Mark had manipulated me into compliance, and that my bloodline was at risk, ending with the line, "We are prepared to challenge the legitimacy of your role as a mother if you force our hand." That was the exact moment I knew they were done forever, but instead of just blocking them or filing more paperwork, we took it further. Mark and I called a meeting with the board of the family business, a company my parents helped start decades ago but one we now fully controlled, where Frank still held the meaningless title of honorary founder, and that afternoon we stripped the title permanently, legally, and unanimously. We changed the locks on the building, issued a statement to employees clarifying the separation, and then made one final move by renaming the company after Lily's middle name. Something quiet, elegant, and strong, and within a week the new name was printed on the door. The first time Frank saw it he showed up again, this time at the office, but he didn't get past the lobby and wasn't even escorted out because no one acknowledged him at all, and I guess in that moment he finally understood what it felt like to be nobody. After the rebrand there was a strange lull, like the eye of a storm, and I knew it wasn't surrender, it was strategy, And about a week later things started unraveling again with vendors emailing to ask if leadership had changed and one admitting they'd gotten a call from someone claiming to be the founder, warning them not to trust new agreements without his signature. We knew exactly who it was, clinging to a title we'd legally taken away. And when we followed up, the truth spilled out fast because Frank had contacted clients, suppliers, and even former employees accusing us of fraud, saying I was unstable and Mark was manipulating everything, plain character assassination. But the next hit didn't come through the business, it came from my daughter, because one morning just as I was about to drive Lily to daycare, the director called and told me a man and a woman had shown up claiming to be her grandparents, saying I had given permission for them to pick her up. Thankfully they weren't on the approved pickup list, so the daycare turned them away immediately, but the director sounded rattled when she told me she hadn't even been there that day, which meant my parents had assumed Lily would be waiting and ready to go. And that realization hit me hard enough that I hung up and called our lawyer before I even finished tying my shoes. At that point it wasn't petty family drama anymore, it was real interference, real danger, and by that afternoon we had a formal no-contact order filed and distributed to the daycare, Lily's pediatrician, and our home security company, with clear legal language stating that if either Frank or Carol came anywhere near my daughter again, the police would be involved, not attorneys. Mark stayed outwardly calm, but that night he still changed every lock in the house anyway. 2 days later the last shoe dropped when we were officially served legal papers, because my parents were suing us, not for custody or defamation, but for emotional and financial damages, claiming I had abandoned my duties as a daughter, that publicly removing their names from the business caused irreversible humiliation, and that the weekly $700 we'd been giving them had created a dependency we had unlawfully cut off. I actually laughed when I read the part where they accused me of severing their lifeline out of spite, because even after the false CPS report, the daycare stunt, and the smear campaign, they still believed they could squeeze something out of us through the courts. Our lawyer shut it down fast and the case was dismissed before it ever saw a hearing, but it confirmed something I needed to accept, which was that they were never going to stop because this was never about fixing anything or healing a relationship, it was about winning, whether that meant money, power, control, or even just attention. So I did something I never thought I would do, and I told the rest of the family everything, not online and not dramatically, but by organizing a quiet gathering at a community space and inviting everyone who had ever asked why I kept my distance from my parents. Most of them showed up, aunts, uncles, cousins, even my brother Paul who'd gone quiet after warning me, and I brought every piece of evidence with me, the emails, the cease and desist, the letter left at our gate, the daycare incident report, and the security footage, and I didn't yell or cry, I just let the facts sit there. When I finished, I told them I wasn't asking anyone to hate Frank and Carol, but I was asking them to stop asking me to forgive them because I was done, my daughter wasn't a pawn, my marriage wasn't negotiable, and my peace wasn't something my parents got to borrow. And then I walked out before anyone could respond. Later that night Paul texted me just 2 words. About time. The next morning I woke up to 5 missed calls from Carol, deleted the voicemails before they even finished downloading, and blocked every number my parents had ever used. And while I didn't feel proud or victorious, I did feel clean, and for the first time in years I wasn't looking over my shoulder. It's been 4 months now since I cut the last tie. 4 months of silence, rebuilding, and actual peace. And while I won't pretend it's been perfect, the quiet has been healing. Sometimes my mind drifts back to them, not with love or longing, but with a strange hollow feeling like realizing a place you used to go no longer exists, and on some nights I remember the small soft things, like my dad bringing me candy from the gas station or my mom humming while doing dishes, the memories that make it hard to reconcile who they became. But then I picture Lily at that table, holding her fork and staring at a slice of cake she was told she didn't deserve, and the ache disappears every single time. I still hear updates through relatives, mostly from Paul, who tells me our parents keep spinning their version of events, claiming I turned on them, that Mark manipulated me, that they were forced out of their own company, conveniently leaving out the part where they humiliated a child, filed a false CPS report, and tried to remove her from daycare. Carol even sent a birthday card last month through a mutual friend, with $50 inside and a note that said, "From Grandma, always here if you need us." But I never saw it because Paul threw it away first and told me they weren't done. They just didn't realize they'd already lost. And he was right, because what they lost wasn't just money or control or a title. They lost me, the daughter who used to twist herself into knots trying to earn their approval, the woman who once thought loyalty meant self-sacrifice even at the cost of her own peace. They'll never meet the version of me that emerged the day I chose to protect my child instead of preserving their pride. And I finally understand now that family isn't blood or obligation or silence to avoid conflict. It's who stays when things fall apart, who builds with you, and who puts your child first without needing to be asked. Mark never pressured me or demanded I choose. He just waited steady and patient, while I worked through the guilt, confusion, and grief of realizing my parents never truly saw me. Not as a mother and not even as a person. And Lily keeps drawing pictures like the one she taped to the fridge last week with 3 stick figures, a tall one with glasses, a smaller one with long brown hair, and a tiny one in a pink dress, and above it in messy letters she wrote "My family," with no one missing and no space left open. And that's when I knew I didn't just protect her, I protected us, and I ended a cycle she'll never have to live through, which is the only legacy that matters to me. My parents have tried to come back in every way they know how, but there's nothing left to unlock. Every door is closed, every number blocked, every lie exposed, and while I never wanted it to end this way, I'm not sorry that it did because I lost my parents, but I found my voice, my peace, and the life I want for my daughter, and that's something I will never apologize for.